So we are continuing our Moraine units, unit 38 of the Shabbos units, which is the second of the Muktze units, second out of 10. Hope to get through this fast enough. We started this guy. We are sitting in Mishkan Shananim. We are learning the Shiur for the Menucha of surname Danger and Shiur Muslim and Fiori. And we would like to define how does one unmuktzify something. So I have items that are not part of my daily use, and therefore they are muktza. I have stones, I have pieces of wood, etc. The question is, how could I make these things? So those are fundamentally muktza. The most fundamental muktza is the muktza of items that are simply not ready for human use, and not part of my world. And those items, right? So I have sticks and stones. I have all those basic, the basic elements, as it were. And the question is, what needs to be done to allow these things to be part of my world enough so they won't be mukta? That's the fundamental question. So let's see some three machlokot, three discussions at least. It's not the word machlokot. We'll have to figure out. So example number, they're all on Shabbat Afim Tet. Example number one, we bring here on page 3, Begizet Semel in Metaltalin, meaning you're allowed to matmin, right? You're allowed to cover your pots on Shabbat, right? You have to cover them to keep them hot because you can't keep the fire going because you don't have a gas fire like we have, right? So you have to keep them hot somehow. So you can cover them with pieces of wool, of the raw material of wool, right? That's not yet prepared to be for use. And therefore, you're allowed to cover your pot with it before Shabbat, but you're not allowed to carry it on Shabbat. First question you might think is, if I covered my pot with this wool, how am I going to take and I can't move the wool, how will I take my food? So you could say, Kilachariyad, right? You mean, right? What? To do minatzad, whatever, right? In other words, you'll have to kick them aside, you'll have to lift the pot and allow them to fall or something, right? Because you won't be able to move them properly. That's what the Mishnah seems to be implying, right? Meaning, again, what's actually happening here? I have this raw material of wool that's not yet prepared for human use. I say, oh wait, I don't want my pot. I have a whole chunk of it, right? I sheared all my sheep. Now I have all this wool that I want to turn into sweaters. I'm not up to that yet. I haven't cleaned them yet, right? I haven't cleaned the wool yet. And I have several stages I have to go through before I can sell them as sweaters. Fine. Comes Shabbos, Erev Shabbat, I say, oh, how am I going to keep my chalent hot? Oh, you know what? I'll take a bunch of this wool and cover the pot. So now I use the wool for human use. Is this wool prepared for human use?
Well, maybe not, probably not, because I thought the Mishnah was saying I'm allowed to.
But I'm allowed to carry it. Right, but you see the problem. In other words, what do you mean not prepared for human use? I just used it.
You give it back to the home material and how it wants to
So the question is right. The question is, can there be such a thing that I'm actually using on Shabbat, but my intention is not turning it into part of the human use, right? It's not yet a proper tool. It's not yet a proper kli, even though I'm using it. But I'm using it for the wrong use or not a kavua use, and therefore it's not yet part of my world. It's part of the items I use, even though I'm using it right now. But I'm gonna re-muktzify it afterwards, right? You do it back into muktze. Muktze, right, is something. Muktze in Hebrew means something I've set aside. So this, even though I'm using it now, I intend on setting it aside again. Possibly. So we're raising a few options. Let's see what the Gemara says. Anyway, so the Gemara says like this. So you're allowed to matmin in this wool. But you wouldn't be allowed to carry it. Meaning the Mishnah is saying two completely separate, disparate things. One thing is, are you allowed to matmin in wool? The answer is yes. There are things you're not allowed to matmin in, right? The things you're allowed to matmin in, the things you're not. So wool is the thing you're allowed to matmin in, fine. Now, are you allowed to carry raw wool on Shabbat? Regardless, having nothing to do with the previous statement, you're not allowed to carry raw wool. But right? Unprocessed wool, I guess would be more accurate, right? You're allowed to carry unprocessed wool on Shabbat unless you've used it for your hatmana. If you used it as the cover of your pots, then you will be allowed to carry it. Why? Because it's already in human use. So that's what Rava contends. Rava says it can't be that I started using this wool and you tell me, oh, but it's not in human use. It is in human use. I'm using it right now. Don't tell me it's not in human use. So it can't be Muktze anymore. Right, there's the famous guy. The famous guy used to walk 3 months each direction. Walk 3 months to yeshiva and back, and be in yeshiva for one night. Sorry, he'd get to yeshiva for Yom Kippur, go back home. No, he'd go home for Yom Kippur. Go home for Yom Kippur, go back. You want to spend one day of Tevet in yeshiva, walk back for Pesach. Right? He's a choshev yid. Anyway, that's why he's Rabbanan Bar Yom. Right? He was the one dayer. Right? This seems to say the same thing. Right? We're talking about the same tzemer. Meaning, when you want to take your food, you pick up the pot cover and allow the tzemer to fall, which implies that you wouldn't be allowed to just lift the tzemer and move it aside, which seems to go against Rava, right? That's because Rava says the Mishnah is talking about two different wools. We have the wool that I'm using to cover my pots that you can use freely. You have the wool that you haven't used at all. That unprocessed wool is not allowed to be used. But the Braita is clearly talking about the same. The Braita is clearly talking about the same wool, right? You must mean something different. Meaning, this is only true about the wool, the unprocessed wool. When you shear it, you put it aside, you say, all right, I'm going to make sweaters out of this. Comes Friday, you take some and you cover your pots and you say, you know what? From now on, this wool will be used to cover pots. So if you cover the pot and you say afterwards, I'm putting it back there, it remains Muktze. If you say, all right, I need wool for pots on Shabbat. From now on, this will be the designated wool for that. It's no longer Muktze. So, Itmanami, כי את רבין אמר רבי יעקב אמר רב אסי בן שאול אמר רבי לא שנו אלא שלא יחדן הטמנה ויחדן הטמנה מטלטלים אותן. רבינה אומר בשל הפתק שנו. תנמיח יגזה צמר של הפתק אינו מטלטלים אותן ומתקדם בעל הבית להשתמש בהם מטלטלים אותן. What does that mean? It means that if you have he's saying they want to say that the original thing again. Rava says structure in the Gemara. Rava says right? There will be cases where one-time use will help. There will be cases in which one-time use will not help. How do we know? So Rava says even if you used it only once, that's good enough to make it not Muktze. Then we have the Braita that says no, even if you use it, it's still Muktze. So I have to define. Okay. Some cases it will be Muktze, some cases it won't. So the first option was when will it not be Muktze if it's designated. Once you designate, you say from now on this is the wool I'm using to cover my pots. So that's the wool that with which you cover pots. It's no longer Muktze, right? The other option is to go the opposite and say any wool that you use even once you're allowed to carry unless it's part of a larger system. That's the heftek. The heftek is something that you're supposed to take to market, right? It's not expected to stay in your house at all. So if you use it once, clearly you don't intend on leaving it there. Heftek, the word heftek? The word heftek, it means the word translates as, I'm trying to think of, it's like goods. Like, yeah, something like that. Not exactly produce, but more like goods. The concept is, again, what are we trying to define? We're trying to define, so first of all, we have a few interesting concepts that were raised here, and we're going to have to try to, we're going to spread them out later, right? Sparse out the different concepts. Number one, let's take a slightly different situation. I walk through the woods, on Tuesday. I go for a walk. Tuesday because selection day, right? So Tuesday is election day. Go for a walk through the woods with my kids, right? Then we stop for lunch. Right? A few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago on Tuesday. It's Tuesday. Oh, we're not going to pass this country. Have another election next week. Right. So I go for a walk in the woods with my kids. Right. Then I say I gotta stop for lunch. So what do? We take some stones, we take some wood, whatever, right? And we set it up as chairs to sit and eat. Right? So from now on, this is now I just set it up. I just make sure that it's not too crooked, that it's not too dirty. Right? That's all I do. Right? So that is my chair. Right. Is it still Muktze?
Yeah.
Wait, but it's my chair. I just said it's my chair. I can say it's Muktze. What? Right. In other words, just because, even though, so when we talk about one-time use, it's important to be aware that one-time use usually implies I'm not thinking too much. Right? Let's say I want to keep that door open. Let's say that door was closing all the time. I want to keep it open. So I just find some stone over there. What? Exactly. So let's say I don't have Rafi. I find some stone and I stick it there, right? Will that stone now be my door stopper? As opposed to, let's think of a different situation. Let's say I come here on Friday and they say, I see this door will give trouble. So I see the stone over here that has a good shape. I want that stone to be my door stopper. Which is better? The stone I happened to use on Wednesday night because the door was closing? Or the stone I really stopped and thought and said, this is a good stone, I'll use that. Which would be, the second one sounds like it would be better, right? On the one hand, what's stronger, machshava or maisa, right? Usually maisa is stronger than machshava. On the other hand, the whole context here of Muktze seems to be more connected to where my mind is, right? So if my mind is in using it one-time use, so I'm maintaining the Muktze status, could be, as opposed to if my intention is to use it my intention is to use it long term, the Chorah should be okay even if I didn't use it now, right? So it's not so clear which is better, right? One-time use or long-term intention. All these, I just want to show where these come up in the sugya, right? Rava says you use this wool once. Does that make it not Muktze? It's a kli. It's a kli that retains heat. I used it just now, so of course it's a kli, right? On the one hand. Right. Then on the other hand, we have the Braita that says that even after you use it once, it still remains Muktze. Well, in what situation? Does that mean that it's not enough to use it once? Right. The first answer in the Gemara is it's not enough to use it once. You need to meyachid. Right. You need to say, I intend on using this long term, to think about it. Right. So the one-time use is not useful if you didn't think.
What's the difference between once and the ahead for the ones using it more than once? It's really the same thing. It's not.
So what do you guys think? Is there a difference between using it once and using it?
For this Shabbos.
So now you're raising an important question, which we're going to have to deal with. This is not a Machloket Rishonim. Thank you. We're going to get to later on. Yichud again, there are a few levels here. There's intention of use, long term. Right, the first answer in the Gemara here says, if you intend on using it long term, then it's not Muktze, implying that if I just use it once in passing, it will remain Muktze. Right, that seems to be the first reading in the Gemara. The second reading in the Gemara says the opposite: used it once, it's no longer Muktze because you used it, unless it's the kind of wool that you would put away right away. That even if you use it now, there's an active thought of, I'm going to re-muktzify it, right? I'm going to make it not a demuktzify, but a re-muktzify, right? And retain its muktzah status now. Right? Now, what Dr. Rose is pointing out is, what happens if I come on Friday and I see the stone and I say, I want to use it tomorrow on Shabbos? All right, let's say, can I use it to the next day on Shabbos? Maybe. Can I use it next week? Maybe not, right? Because the thought that says it's only this Shabbos implies I'm not really turning this into part of my world. I'm using it for this Shabbos, which begs the question again. So how can you use it the next day? Right. So then we're gonna have to play with all of these. I'm just opening up all of the different permutations we're gonna have later on. Let's see the second. Lift it up. The person is lifting up good enough, or do you have to use, right? Or do you have to actually use? All right, let's see the second story. The second story about on page 3. I think by you it's slightly different, right? It's on page 4 by you. Right. Okay. Tana Rava בר בר חנה קמי דרב. חריות של דקל שגדרן לעצים ונמלח עליהן לישיבה, צריך לקשור. רב שבג אומר, אין צריך לקשור. Meaning I need to, I have these wood. Can you get this? Yeah. So I have my wood pile, right? And I took them for lumber to use as wood, right? And then I say, you know what? I want to sit. I can use them as benches to sit on them now. So Tanakama says you need to change something about them. You need to tie them together. So there will be a chair, right? And Rashbag says, no, you don't. It's enough that you intend on using them. It's enough to think about. You want to do it, right? Nimlach alem yeshiva. So the action was the himalchut, right? The thought. Rashbag is talking about thinking, and Tanakam is talking about doing an action that prepares them for use. Right? An action that prepares them for use is clearly the best of the 3 so far, right? As we're talking about thinking, right? Intention, one-time use, or action that prepares them for use. Action that prepares them for use is the most stringent one, because that you're actually doing something active that will remain long term. Oh, something. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Was it 3-4 people?
Sorry.
You've been here before?
You've been here before, yeah. Yes. Only the best of the best can make it here. So who tani la v'hu amar la halacha kerashbag. Let's see the itmar is the important thing to us. So we have right. Tani la we have the Tana. The Tana Rav bar Chana. Rav Chana brought this Masoret, right? And said this machlok. And he's the one who he brought the Masorah that there was such a braita, and he also knew to say who they held halacha like. Who Tani la, he's the one who quoted it. Tani is to quote Tanaic sources.
He's not the one who says for each other.
No, that's a quotation. From Tanaim, from earlier Tanaim, yes. From earlier Tanaim. And his ability, he is able, Hutanila, he quoted the Tanaim, Tani is to quote Tanaim, Hutanila, and he also said, Vuamarla, and he also knew to say that Halachake Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, which implies you don't need to do, so if I have my wood pile, and I say, you know what, I see some nice pieces of wood there that would be fitting to use as garden chairs, right? To fit in the garden on Shabbat. So I'm allowed to sit in the garden on them on Shabbat. They're no longer Muktze.
Once you've changed the
Yehud.
on Shabbat.
No, you have to change the Yehud before Shabbat. Correct. The question is, how do you change the Yehud? So Tanakama says to change the Yehud, you have to do an action that prepares them for use. And Rashbag says, no, it's enough to think. Or the truth is, yeah, it does. Rashbag is not very clear, right?
So you can
Rashbag says,
another spot?
yes. It's a chair. Are you allowed to move a chair on Shabbos? Same thing. That's the thinking, right? It doesn't look like a chair, but it's fundamentally it's a chair. So we'll mention some interesting AI stuff about that later on. Anyway, Itmar, Rav Amar. So there's a 3 machloket who to hold like. Rav Amar kosher, that you do need to kosher. Shmuel Amar choshev. Rav Asi Amar yoshev אף על פי שלא קישר ואף על פי שלא חישב. So just based on that, right? So Rav says you have to do an act that prepares them. Shmuel says you have to have the intention, and Ravasi says it's enough. Ravasi says it's enough to sit. Yeshev before Shabbos, correct? All of it before Shabbos, yes, but also Yeshev before Shabbos. Now, question: which is the least stringent of the three? So you'd think Choshev is just thinking, right? So you don't need to do any more than that, right? But Ravasi says Yoshev afal pi shelo kishev afal pi shelo chishev. When he says afal pi shelo chishev, that sounds like
on Thursday.
right, exactly, because that's what was that's right. That's what I was saying before. Exactly, right. But just, I'm not redefining exactly. I'm not necessarily redefining what is this item, right? I sat here, but I sat in passing. I'm not necessarily redefining the item itself. Right. Right. So here there is, right, normally a Maisa is stronger than a Machshava, right? And actions speak louder than thoughts, right? But in this context, it seems that thinking would be stronger than use. Now we said once Svara why? Why? Because the use that you have here is not intended on being. You have in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm not really going to ever use this. I'm not really going to ever use this again, right? So in a way, in the back of your mind, you're kind of maintaining the Muktze status, right? Because in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm really going to use this again, right? That's the or ever again. I give the example earlier.
May I use it for you?
No, even less than that. That's why I gave earlier, just before. I gave the example, and it's not your fault. That's why. He was here from 8:20. He was just not here. I know. Sorry. You go for a hike through the forest. You stop for lunch. You sit on some logs of wood, right? Are they now chairs? There, you'd say, of course not, right? No. Right, Ravasi is saying yes. Ravasi says yes. So why does Ravasi right? So Ravasi says yes, and that's the bigger chidush than Shmuel says you think. Because if I walk past the logs and I say, "Oh, these are good logs," tomorrow I'll come for a walk with my kids and we'll move them around and sit. Right? That's what Shmuel says. Ravasi says you don't even need that, even if you happen to sit on it without thinking. Now, is there a difference between? I will raise the question: is there a difference in the chayot shedekel shegidaran leitzim when you brought them into your garden, and then you happen to sit on them? Is that different from logs of wood that you happen to meet in the forest? Those might be two different things, right? Because it could be in my garden. I'm going to use them. The question is how, but I am going to use them. In the forest, I don't think I'll ever meet them again. Unless I do think. If I think, that's fine. My one-time use doesn't imply my ever turning into part of my peripheral, right, world, as it were. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Where in the woods? Yeah. So that would be enough kamina, right? Would Ravasi? So Ravasi would be the only one who would allow it theoretically, right?
Even though it's in the future, I don't.
That's why I said theoretically, right? Because it's enough for him. It's enough one-time use works. But I do caveat that it could be that's only true about wood that I collected into my garden already, not wood that's out there and I don't think I'll ever see again. It could be that there I'm remuktzeifying it as soon as I let go of it. Right? I demuktzified it by using it, but I remuktzified it by saying it's still part of the wood. So that's the idea there. Let's skip to the third example. The third story. Amar Yehuda, machnis adam melo kupato afar v'oseh ba kol tzorko. So sorry? The third example on the next page. Next page, sorry. Amar Yehuda, machnis adam melo kupato afar v'oseh ba kol tzorko. So I need dirt at home to clean the floor, right? So it used to be. You clean the floor with dirt. So how do you do that? So you fill up a bucket, and then you pour it in the corner of the room, and that's what you have, right?
Mhm.
So what I did effectively, what did I do to prepare this for use on Shabbat? We're talking about dirt.
Mhm.
We're talking about dirt.
Yes.
Dirt is the Muktze of Muktze, right? It's dirt, right? I'm allowed to schlep it around.
Designated as
Exactly.
first time.
It was designated, right? I didn't do, now over here, it's an interesting thing. I didn't do anything to make it more readily, I made it more readily available in the sense that it's closer to me in my room, but I didn't wash it. I didn't string it up like like Tanakama's there said, right? Tanakama said show the wooden, right? To somehow connect them, put them together somehow, right? All those things, I didn't do anything like that. I just put them in a corner together. But I did collect and put them.
I had an idea that I'm going to use it on Shabbat.
Oh, and I had in mind, correct, yes. Right? I didn't do the kshira. This works for Ashbag who says I had the intention, fine. You had the intention, etc. But according to Rabbanan who say you have to do an act to prepare them. Meaning there are things that you could prepare, right? I have my wood logs, I have my lumber, I have my stones, whatever I have that I could make a bit more comfortable for use on Shabbat. So that, according to Tanakama, you'd have to prepare somehow. When it comes to the dirt, what are you going to do to the dirt now? The dirt is dirt. There isn't much else you could do to prepare it for use. So
That's what the dirt itself. You can move it to another floor. A bucket. And that's be part of their house.
right. So their assumption, correct. But their assumption, you see that their assumption is that if it's that you need to do something to make it more easily usable, not only accessible. Right? You see that's what they're assuming.
The logs here to try to make it into a chair.
You'll see in a moment stones.
Necessary to make it more usable. You know, that the mindset, the designation is more obvious.
Okay, that's fair. So
If you're putting into the
That's
corner,
another way.
the corner of the house and making it more accessible, and you made a decision.
Right. No, what Dr. Rose is saying that when we compare this to the stones or the wood that you need to prepare for Shabbat, you need to make it a better kli, more of a kli, easier to use. Is that the point? Or is the point that you did something to show this is a kli? It's not going to be necessarily more comfortable. It's just now it's a kli. Now you can see I put something in it. So let's see. Let's see the example. Another story on page 6. Right. Yeah. That's the Tana who disagrees with her with Benjamin Ben Gamliel, right? Right. So I will already jump a bit to the end based on this, just to say a bit. On the one hand, we see the Gemara. In the Chariot Shel Dekel, we see that Shmuel and Ravasi agree that you don't need the Kshol. Sorry, you have the Hutani of Amala Halacha Rashbag. So then you can argue Rashbag like Shmuel or Rashbag like Ravasi, right? Rashbag that's enough to think, or Rashbag that it's enough to one-time use is enough. Fine. So then you can discuss that. But the fact that the Gemara here goes out of its way to tell you the fire, you need to do another preparation or not. According to Ravasi, you wouldn't need any of that, right? It's enough to think. So based on this, Rabbeinu Tam says that it must be we hold like, and they call it Rabbanan. They don't say Tanakama, they say Rabbanan. Based on this, Rabbeinu Tam. So basically, this is where the machloket starts, right? That most Baalei Tosafot will say that halacha is like Ravasi, based on the previous, based on Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right? Based on Rav Rachana holding Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, previous Gemara. Rabbeinu Tam is going to say, no, you see in this Gemara, Rabbanan are called the Tanakama, who says you need to do something to make it more readily usable, and the Gemara starts differentiating between Kupato Afar and the Gizei Tzemach. These are different things. Why? It must be that we really do hold like them. So then Rabbeinu Tam will say, in order to demuxify something, you have to do something to the item to make it more readily prepared. And Baalei Tosafot will disagree and say, what do you mean? We said Halacha Rashban Shimon Gamliel, who said Lo tzarich likshol. So that's going to be the machloket. Eventually, that's going to be the machloket. Let's go through another stage, which will provide further proof. This is the Gemara in the Shabbat of Kuf Hey. Kiat Rav Dini Amar Bichanina ve'Amri La Amar Bizeira Amar Bichanina. פעם אחת הלך רבי למקום אחד, ומצא נדבך של אבנים. And then he says an amazing statement. אמר לתלמידיו, צאו, wait, you have it?
6.
Yeah. אמר לתלמידיו an amazing thing, צאו וחישבו כדי שנשב עליהם למחר. So, Rav Dimi says, בשם רבי חנינא, that Rebbe said, go think and intend on using it tomorrow. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Now here's my question. Why does Rebbe have to tell his guys to come out and think? Rebbe's a great thinker. Can't he think himself? Can't he think for himself? See my question?
The Maaseh is different.
Right. Let's according if I say that you don't need a Maaseh.
Obviously, they must be.
Right.
Otherwise, just thinking that it seems to be that the Maaseh is that you have to. There has to be some recognition that these are the tools and that's not.
Oh, so one option, right? So why did Rebbe tell them go out, right? So one option is to say he wants the Talmidim, right? And they have a whole bunch of stones here. So tomorrow we can have a shiur in the sun; it'll be beautiful. But
Use your chair.
use your chair. You can't go. Rebbe couldn't go and say, well, there's 500 chairs. There are 500 stones here. 30 of them will be used tomorrow. 30 random ones my Talmidim will use tomorrow. They have to be more specific.
Only for him. No Muktze in the Ben Adam or who.
Oh, that's another important point. We'll get to later on. Right now, if I designate something, presumably the answer must be, right? Let's say I want to invite you guys over to sit with me in my garden on Shabbat, right? So I have a bunch of stones there. And I say, all right, these are the stones that we're going to use tomorrow to sit. You wouldn't be able to come sit on them? It'd be a very bad host.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not reasonable, right? Now there's the chorah once I designate it. So
you reclassify it.
Right, exactly.
So anybody then I can come in and pick it up tomorrow and move it somewhere else.
Right, you can steal it from me. There you go.
That's a good
Now we're
idea.
talking. Of course, I know you.
Yeah.
So,
That's
but
another thing we need to get one to do. The chairs are folded up in your garden.
okay.
So we have chairs anyway.
What the actual chairs? The chairs.
Okay.
No, so the actual chairs aren't looked anyway. The whole discussion is only things that are part of nature.
It's the same type of
Yeah,
thing
but
as the
that-
stuff.
No, it's still a kli. This is the first two Gemaras on this page are exactly
To define what it is.
right, to say that something that's defined that's already predefined as a kli, none of this discussion is relevant. So one option is to say we need the Talmidim to be more specific and say, okay, I'm going to sit on that stone, that or that stone. Right? Now, once you come the next day, whatever I designated, you can use too. But if I say, well, all the stones in the forest, they're all not Muktze because we need to use them tomorrow. You can't do that, right? That's why you tell the Talmidim, go figure out what stones you'll be sitting, where you're sitting on. You don't necessarily have to do anything. Just decide, I'll be sitting on that one or that one, right? Because you need to be specific enough. So, Rabbi Yochanan, yeah.
No, I can't do that. I can't move it.
No. So that's a good question. The answer is yes. You're allowed to sit as long as you don't move. But the point is, when you want to hear shiur, what happens when you go and sit down here to listen to shiur? right? Oh, now we're sitting right.
You can't sit. So you're not.
You have to
Nothing
face
to do.
Rebbe the
You
right
can-
way.
you
You want
can-
yes. It's Muktze betiltul. Exactly. Yes. All right. So Rabbi Yochanan disagrees and says the reason he called them idimer is because you have to do something. It's Chachan Rabbi lemaise. What is the maise? Rabbi Yami amar tzu v'lamdum amar lehu Avasi amar tzu v'shafshafum. So lamdum is to make a proper preparation, right? And shafshafum is to clean them off. So lamdum is to take what's the word? Those metal things that you could chip bits of this stuff off with. Chisel, thank you. Right, but chisel some of the stone off to make it even smoother, whatever. Right, you have to do something.
Just to sit in it?
Yes, just
And
to,
just to sit in it.
yes, correct. But again,
You have to get it
before the
done.
Muktze,
You're
yes,
doing something active.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Rabbi Yami is doing something much more
Okay, it's doing much more. Okay.
invasive, much more right.
But to sit in it, and again, this is my chair. I'm going to sit in it tomorrow.
To sit stam, no problem. To move it, you're
No,
going
I
to
can
around.
sit in it. Not doing any other change.
Tomorrow, you mean before Shabbat?
Before Shabbat.
Before Shabbat.
And I designated that.
Right, so that would not be enough. Correct.
Correct.
Correct. That would be the machloket here, right? That would exactly be the machloket. That Rav Dimi says that Rabbi Chanina says that Rabbi says that, and Rabbi Yochanan says no. Rabbi Chanina says B'Shem Rabbi something else. So yeah, you have to do so. Just make sure we realize who's arguing with who. Rav Dimi is arguing with Rabbi Yochanan, right? Rav Dimi possibly Rabbi Zera. It says, but Rav Dimi, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Zera are saying you don't. It's enough to think and designate. Rabbi Yochanan says thought is not enough. You need to actually do an action that prepares them, right? Once again, this is going to adhere to the machloket I said before that we're going to see in Barat Tosafot, right? Barat Tosafot will say, oh, Rav Dimi and Rabbi Zera, they're the ones who brought the Masorah, so they know that you don't need to do any kind of preparation. Rabbi Yotam says yes, but Rabbi Yochanan is the bottom line in the Gemara. I see Rabbi Yochanan says you do have to do something that prepares them in actuality. Now, on the other hand, we have to bear in mind and remember that there's a difference between these stones and the wood we saw earlier. What's the difference between these stones and the wood we saw earlier?
In that run,
Right.
it was with the wood.
Right, very good. The wood was chopped. I chopped the wood, I collected it, I brought it into my whatever, right? Wherever I keep wood, my woodshed, right? I brought it to my woodshed. Now, so I collected it, I brought it in, I did many things are prepared for my use, but for use as fuel, not for use as chairs. Right? So we can argue that it's easier to change the wood because what made the wood Muktze? What makes the stone? What makes the stones Muktze? Because they're part of nature. They're part of nature. What makes the wood Muktze?
Yes.
Right, my intention. Right? I chopped it up. I brought it home. So is it still Muktze? Because I had the wrong thought. What's easier to change out of Muktze, that or that? All right, don't answer yet, but you see the point, right? What makes it Muktze in the case of wood is that my intention was wrong. I had an intention that made it remain. Yes, yes, no, there was an intention that made it remain Muktze. As opposed to in the stones, I've never done anything with these stones, that's all.
So when they retrofit back to changes for the actual thing.
What am
Your thought about it now changes.
Brera?
Yeah.
Brera. That's interesting. You don't think that? I don't think it's very. I don't think it's relevant. I don't think it works. But I don't think it works in this case. But that's good thinking.